I grew up in a place most people would drive past without noticing, a patch of green tucked between two winding roads with a weathered sign that read, Willow Creek Inn, family owned since 1978. The first thing you'd hear when you stepped out of your car was the sound of water, the slow trickle of the creek running just beyond the back porch. The second thing was the front door, always creaking, no matter how many times Dad oiled the hinges. That sound, the door and the water, it was the soundtrack of my childhood. My parents, Robert and May Carter, poured their lives into that inn. It wasn't fancy, just 7 rooms, one of them permanently out of order because of the leak that never stopped. But to us, it was everything. Dad handled the repairs, the guests, the heavy lifting. Mom managed the kitchen and the stories. She had a way of making strangers feel like long-lost cousins. People came back year after year just to hear her ask, "How's your boy doing in college?" even if she barely remembered his name. And then there was me, Bethany, though everyone called me Beth. From the time I could see over the counter, I was helping, folding linens, restocking coffee packets, scrubbing the same old pine floors until they shined like honey. I didn't think of it as work back then. It was just life. My younger sister, Hannah, wasn't much for chores. She was the sunshine of the family, as Mom liked to say. She could charm the guests with her smile, make them laugh with some story about school, then slip away before the dishes were done. I didn't mind. Not at first. Hannah was bright, wild, beautiful. I figured everyone had their role and mine was to keep things running. When I turned 20, I was the one who convinced Dad to finally accept card payments. I built the inn's first website on our old computer, line by line between coffee shifts and guest check-ins. He used to pat my shoulder and say, "You're my right hand, Beth." I couldn't do this without you. Those words used to mean the world to me. Now I sometimes wish I'd asked him to write them down. The years rolled on like the creek behind the house, constant, familiar, but slowly eroding the edges. Dad's back gave out first. Then came the winters when bookings dropped, and I started covering bills from my own savings. I didn't tell them. They'd just worry. When Mom's arthritis got worse, I took over the laundry too. Guests still smiled and said, "You all make such a great team." And I'd smile back because correcting them, saying it was mostly just me, felt cruel somehow. I stayed when my friends left for bigger towns and bigger lives. I dated once or twice, but no one lasted. "You're married to that inn," one boyfriend joked. Maybe he was right. Still, I believed that loyalty mattered, that if you gave enough, people would see you. That's the kind of faith daughters are raised with. The quiet kind, the one that doesn't ask for recognition, just a place at the table. But as I got older, little things started to shift. When Hannah moved back home after her marketing degree, Mom said, "She's going to help us bring in more business." Within a month, Hannah had taken over the front desk. She was friendly, efficient, and had that effortless charm I never did. Guests adored her. Mom bragged about her to everyone. "Our Hannah has a real head for business," she'd say. Never mind that the room rates, the website, the bookings, and even the email templates were still mine. I remember one afternoon, walking past the sitting room. Hannah was showing a couple around, gesturing like she'd owned the place for years. When they left, she laughed and said, "They loved it. You know, maybe we should rename it Hannah's Inn. Sounds friendlier, don't you think?" I laughed too. But something twisted inside me that I couldn't quite name. The night Dad had his heart attack, I was the one who found him. In the garden, half covered in fallen leaves, as if he'd just been tending to the hydrangeas. It was late September. The air smelled like rain and endings. The days after that blurred together. Casseroles from neighbors, funeral arrangements, paperwork. Hannah stayed busy handling guests. Mom stayed busy pretending she was fine. And me, I stayed busy holding everyone together because someone had to. When the inn reopened a week later, I could still feel Dad in every creak of the floorboards. That first night back, I walked through the halls with a dust rag, wiping frames that didn't need cleaning. In the reflection of the lobby mirror, I caught my own face. Tired, hollow, older somehow. I whispered, "You can rest now, Dad." I've got it, and I meant it. But what I didn't know then was that having it didn't mean it would ever be mine. A few weeks after the funeral, Mom called a meeting. She said the lawyer wanted to finalize Dad's estate, just a few signatures, nothing complicated. I remember sitting at that same kitchen table where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases. The curtains were half drawn, sunlight spilling in like something reluctant. Mom made tea, the good kind, the one we saved for guests. Hannah walked in wearing one of Dad's old sweaters, her hair tied up like she wanted to look the part. She gave me a small smile. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just tired." She said, "You've been doing too much, Beth." Maybe now you can finally relax a little. I didn't know what she meant then, but I would soon enough. That morning, that simple, ordinary morning, was the start of everything unraveling. The ink on the papers, the words on the page, the realization that in the story of our family, I'd been written as a footnote. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder, what happens when the one who holds it all together lets go? The day the will was read started like any other. The sun came up pale and cold, the kind of morning where light doesn't warm you. It just reminds you that you're still here. I made coffee, black and strong, and sat by the kitchen window, watching mist curl over the creek. Outside, the inn looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters needed painting. The porch railing leaned to one side. It was strange how the things you love most can start falling apart the minute you stop pretending they're fine. Mom's voice came from the hallway. "Beth, are you ready?" "The lawyer's waiting in town." I nodded, though I hadn't even put my shoes on. The law office was on Main Street between a barber shop and a bakery that still smelled like cinnamon rolls. Inside, everything felt too formal. Polished floors, framed diplomas, a faint buzz from the overhead lights. I could almost hear Dad grumble about how lawyers always overcharged for air conditioning. Mom sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap. Hannah twirled her car keys and hummed softly, like she was waiting for a lunch reservation. I tried not to notice the contrast, her new manicure against my calloused hands, her confidence against my quiet. The lawyer, Mr. Alden, cleared his throat. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Maybe he already knew what was coming. He opened a manila folder and began. "Robert Carter, being of sound mind and body." My stomach tightened. I watched the dust motes dance in the sunlight cutting through the blinds. "To my wife, May, I leave all personal effects, financial accounts, and joint property." Mom nodded. No surprise there. Then he looked at Hannah. "To my daughter, Hannah Carter, I leave full ownership of the Willow Creek Inn, including land and assets." For a second, the words didn't register. They just hung there, floating in the air between us like smoke. Then he continued, "To my daughter, Bethany Carter, I leave my tools, the 2005 Chevy pickup, and the antique upright piano in the front room." And that was it. No mention of the nights I stayed up doing books by candlelight when the power went out. No mention of the roof repairs I paid for or the property taxes I covered when bookings were low. Just the truck, the one I'd driven since high school. And a piano nobody had played since Mom's arthritis set in. Hannah reached over and squeezed my hand. "Dad knew how much this place meant to me," she said softly. "He'd want me to take care of it." I forced a smile. "I'm sure he would." Mr. Alden closed the folder, cleared his throat again, and said, "That concludes the reading." He stood, waiting for us to leave. I stood too, though my legs felt like someone else's. Mom turned to me. "Beth, don't take it personally. Your father just wanted to keep the inn in the family. Hannah will make sure you're always welcome here." Welcome, like a guest. I nodded once, then walked out before my voice could betray me. The drive home was quiet. The pickup rattled like it always had, but the sound didn't comfort me anymore. When I reached my house, I didn't go inside. I just sat in the truck with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The strangest part about heartbreak isn't the noise. It's the silence that follows. It's the way your brain keeps replaying what just happened, as if you can edit it, change the ending, make it fair. But no matter how many times I ran the scene, it ended the same way. Hannah smiling, Mom nodding, me invisible. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house barefoot, the floor cold under my feet. I ended up in the garage staring at Dad's toolbox sitting in the corner. It was the same one he'd left me in the will, rusted, dented, still smelling faintly of cedar and oil. I ran my hand along the top, tracing the scratches on the lid. It hit me then. This was my inheritance. Not the inn, not the land, but the habit of fixing what other people broke. I opened the lid. Inside, everything was where he'd left it. Wrench, screwdriver, tape measure. Underneath the tools was an envelope. My name, written in Dad's handwriting. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Inside, there was no money, no document, just a short note on yellow paper. Beth, you were always the strong one. Don't let that turn into silence. Take care of yourself. I sat down right there on the cold floor, holding that note. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't closure. But it was something. A reminder that maybe he'd known more than I thought. The next morning, I drove back to the inn. I told myself it was to check on Mom, but deep down, I needed to see it, to face what wasn't mine anymore. When I turned into the gravel driveway, the sign out front had been repainted. The letters were fresh and white, with a new tagline underneath, Hannah's Willow Creek Inn, where memories begin. I laughed out loud. Not the funny kind of laugh, the hollow kind that echoes back at you. Inside, the walls smelled like paint and lemon polish. The old photographs were gone. The quilt Dad's sister made, gone too. In their place were candles, framed quotes, and a small chalkboard that said, Welcome to Hannah's Haven. Mom stood behind the counter arranging brochures. She looked up and smiled. Too bright, too fast. Beth. What a nice surprise. I looked around the room. It's different. Fresh start, she said. Hannah's really turning things around. We even have bookings through the fall already. That's good, I said, forcing the words through my throat. Hannah came out from the kitchen, her hair tied up, wearing a crisp apron that read Owner. She wiped her hands and grinned. Hey, you like it? We added tea service in the afternoons. People love that rustic charm. I nodded again. It looks nice. She tilted her head, sensing something under my tone. Beth, don't be upset. You know Dad wanted this. I'm just honoring his wishes. For a moment, I wanted to shout, to tell her what honoring wishes really looked like, how many sacrifices it took to keep those lights on. But I didn't. Instead, I said, I hope it makes you happy, Hannah. Then I walked out. Outside, the creek was still running. Slow, patient, unbothered. I stood there for a long time, listening. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like part of that place. I felt like a ghost haunting something I'd built. As I turned to leave, I noticed something carved into the wooden railing by the porch. Faint letters, half sanded over by fresh paint. It said, B+R, 2003. Dad had carved it with me one summer when we finished rebuilding the deck. I ran my fingers over the grooves, the wood rough against my skin, and I whispered, It's okay, Dad. I'm done fixing things that don't want to stay together. Then I walked away, for the first time, without looking back. For a few weeks, I tried to pretend life hadn't changed. I went to work, cooked my meals, watered the little herb garden outside my kitchen window. But every night, when the house went quiet, my mind drifted back to the inn, to the sound of guests laughing, to Hannah's bright voice, to the creak of the floors that once felt like home. It's strange how loss doesn't always come as death. Sometimes it comes as a room repainted, a name replaced, a history rewritten. One Friday afternoon, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was too sweet. That tone she used when she wanted something. "Beth," she said, "I was thinking you could stop by for dinner tomorrow. Just the three of us." We haven't sat down together in ages. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, but another part, the part still trained to make peace, said yes before I even realized it. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll come by." When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked calm, but deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be dinner. It was going to be a reckoning. Saturday evening came with a soft rain. The drive to Willow Creek felt longer than usual, though I'd taken that road 1,000 times before. When I turned into the driveway, the porch lights glowed warmly. Too warmly, like a photograph trying too hard to look happy. Mom greeted me at the door with a hug that didn't land right. "You look tired," she said, brushing my arm. "Are you eating well?" "I'm fine, Mom." The dining table was set beautifully. Candles, folded napkins, even wine glasses I'd never seen before. Hannah sat across from my usual seat, smiling like a host greeting a guest. "Glad you came," she said. "We made your favorite, roast chicken with thyme." I nodded, taking my seat. The air smelled good, but something in the room was off, too rehearsed, too careful. Dinner started with small talk. Mom asked about work. Hannah mentioned new guests from Boston. I answered politely, waiting for the real reason they'd called me here. It didn't take long. "Well," Mom said, setting down her fork with a little clink, "now that things have settled with the inn, Hannah and I have been thinking." My chest tightened. "About what?" Mom glanced at Hannah, who gave her a small nod. "You know that small cottage you bought last year? The one up near the woods?" I froze. "Yes," I said slowly. "What about it?" Mom smiled like she was announcing good news. "We think it would be perfect for us. It's all on one floor. Easy for your father's old knees if he were still here, and for my back, too. You hardly use it, Beth. It's just sitting there," I blinked. "You want to move into my cottage?" Hannah chimed in, her tone bright and rational. "Just for a while, Beth. You live alone. It's such a waste of space. Mom needs somewhere peaceful, and you're always saying you want her to rest more." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. They looked at me expectantly, like this was already decided. I set it down carefully and leaned back in my chair. "So, let me understand," I said, my voice steady. "You gave away the inn I kept running for 15 years, and now you want to move into the only home I actually own?" Mom frowned. "Don't make it sound ugly. We're family." "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You only say that when you want something." Hannah's smile cracked. "You're being dramatic again. You always twist everything into an attack." I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "An attack? Hannah, I've spent half my life cleaning up after everyone else, paying bills, fixing leaks, holding this family together while you played hostess. I didn't even ask for credit, just decency." Her face flushed. "You've always been jealous, Beth. Admit it. Dad loved me more, and you never got over it." The room went still. Even Mom didn't deny it. I took a slow breath. "Maybe you're right," I said. Maybe he did. But I stopped trying to compete the moment I realized love shouldn't be a contest. Mom's voice rose. "Don't speak to your sister like that. We're offering you a chance to do something kind, and this is how you respond?" "Kindness?" I repeated. "You mean silence. You mean obedience." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "You know what, Mom? You can call it whatever you want, but I'm done." Hannah's jaw tightened. "Don't turn this into a scene." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same smug calm I used to mistake for confidence. It wasn't. It was entitlement. "If you need a place to stay," I said, "you can rent one like everyone else. My cottage isn't yours. Not anymore, not ever." Then I walked toward the door. Mom's voice followed me. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us?" I turned back. "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked softly. "Besides reminding me that giving isn't the same as being loved?" Her eyes widened, but no words came. Hannah just crossed her arms, muttering, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least it'll be my regret." And then I left. The rain had stopped. The air outside smelled clean, sharp, alive. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt awake. As I walked to my truck, I could still hear the faint sound of the creek behind the inn. It used to sound comforting. Now it sounded like applause, not for them, but for me. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood in the doorway, breathing. There was no anger left, only clarity. I realized that for years I'd mistaken endurance for peace and silence for strength. But real peace doesn't come from keeping everyone happy. It comes from finally telling the truth, even if your voice shakes. That night, I slept like I hadn't in years. No guilt, no weight, just the sound of rain fading into morning and the quiet knowledge that I'd finally stopped fixing what was never mine to fix. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains like it had been waiting for me. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, hands wrapped around the mug until the warmth reached my bones. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel lonely. Now it just felt peaceful. But peace doesn't erase pain. It just gives it room to breathe. I spent most of that day in silence, replaying the dinner in my head. The words, the looks, the way Hannah's voice sharpened when she said jealous. It was strange. I didn't feel guilt anymore, only clarity. I'd spent so many years believing that if I kept the peace, I'd be loved. But keeping peace with people who thrive on taking isn't peace at all. It's surrender. Around noon, I opened my mail. Among the bills and grocery coupons was an envelope from the county tax office. When I tore it open, my stomach dropped. It was a delinquent notice. Property taxes on the inn hadn't been paid for 2 years. My name wasn't on the deed, but it was still listed as a financial contributor because I'd co-signed the refinancing years earlier. A laugh slipped out of me. Dry, tired, bitter. So even now, I was cleaning up after them. I should have been furious. Instead, I just felt done. I called the county clerk, confirmed the details, and then called the bank. "Yes," I told them, "I'll settle it." But this time, I wasn't doing it quietly. That afternoon, I gathered every folder, every invoice, every receipt I'd kept over the years, all the proof of payments, maintenance repairs, tax transfers. There was a time I'd saved these things out of habit. Now I saved them for something else, accountability. When I walked into Mr. Alden's office, he looked surprised to see me. "Beth," he said, standing, "I didn't expect you back so soon." "I'm not here about the will," I said. "I'm here about ownership, financial contribution, unpaid taxes, and misuse of a shared account." His brows lifted. "You want to file a claim?" I nodded. "Not out of revenge. Just fairness." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Bring me everything you've got." I slid a thick folder across his desk. "This is everything," I said. 15 years of everything. He opened it and whistled softly. "Beth, this is substantial. You've essentially financed half that property." "I know," I said, "but I never wanted to take it from them. I just want them to stop taking from me." The following week was a blur of paperwork, phone calls, notarized forms. Each signature felt like closing a door that had been left open too long. Mr. Alden called it a claim of financial equity. I called it finally standing up straight. Word spread quickly in small towns. By the end of the week, I was getting calls from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Some were supportive, others not so much. "How could you do this to your family?" one aunt asked. I said softly, "They stopped being family when they treated me like the help." 3 days later, Mom showed up at my door. She didn't knock. She just walked in like she used to. Her lipstick was smudged, her voice sharp. "What is this nonsense about legal action?" she demanded. "It's not nonsense," I said calmly. "It's acknowledgement. You're tearing this family apart." I shook my head. "No, Mom. I'm just refusing to keep holding the broken pieces." She blinked, caught off guard by my tone. "You've always been so cold," she said finally. "So ungrateful. Do you think your father would want this?" I met her eyes. If he saw what this became, I think he'd understand. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just turned and left, the sound of her heels fading down the walkway. That night, I sat by the window, rain tapping against the glass. I should have felt alone, but instead, I felt something new. Relief. For once, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't shrinking to make room for their comfort. I was finally standing in my own space. Weeks passed. The claim went through faster than I expected. Mr. Alden called one morning and said, "Congratulations, Beth. The court validated your contribution. You're entitled to a financial share of the property I didn't cheer." I just exhaled, because it wasn't about winning, it was about being seen. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived from Hannah. The handwriting was rushed, messy. "Beth, I can't believe you'd do this. You've humiliated Mom. You've humiliated me. We were supposed to be a family. You're making it impossible to move on." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer with Dad's note. Two voices years apart. One asking me to be strong, the other asking me to stay small. And for the first time, I could tell the difference. A month later, I drove out to the cottage, the one Mom and Hannah had wanted. The air smelled of pine and rain. The creek nearby murmured softly, steady and sure. I stood on the porch, keys in hand, and realized how rare it felt to have something that was truly mine. Inside, everything was simple. White curtains, wooden shelves, a small fireplace. I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching light filter through the trees. For years, I'd filled silence with other people's noise. Their expectations, their wants, their crises. Now the silence felt sacred. On the table beside me was the court notice, official, final, signed. I read it once more, then set it aside. My name, printed clearly beside the words, "Recognized Contributor." It wasn't just ink on paper. It was proof that what I gave had weight. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Because somewhere deep down, I knew he'd meant for me to have strength. Not the inn, not the land, but this. The courage to stop asking for permission to exist. That evening, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the creek glimmering under the last light. I took off my shoes and walked barefoot across the grass. Each step felt like unlearning something. Guilt, fear, apology. I stopped at the edge of the water and said it out loud, to the trees, to the air, maybe to myself. I'm done fixing what was never mine to fix. The water carried my words away, gentle and sure, and I knew, finally, that this stillness, this quiet strength, was the peace I'd been chasing all along. Winter came quietly that year. The leaves along Willow Creek turned from gold to rust, then fell away completely. By December, the air carried that sharp, clean stillness that only cold weather can bring, the kind that makes you hear your own thoughts more clearly. I spent my first Christmas alone in the cottage. No big tree, no glittering ornaments, just a small pine branch in a vase and a single candle burning on the windowsill. It should have felt lonely, but it didn't. I baked gingerbread the way Mom used to, but this time I didn't rush it. I played an old record Dad loved, something slow and full of strings, and let the music fill the quiet corners. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to show up. I was just there. Enough. Present still. In January, a letter came from Mr. Alden, the attorney. He enclosed a copy of the final settlement from the court. Hannah had agreed to sell the inn. Half of the proceeds were being transferred to me. I stared at the number. A generous sum, enough to start over anywhere I wanted. But that wasn't what made my chest tighten. It was the note he'd included beneath it. "Miss Carter, your father once told me you were the only one who understood how that place really worked. I think he'd be proud of what you did, not for the money, but for the peace." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the same box where I kept Dad's handwritten note. Those two pieces of paper, one personal, one legal, felt like bookends to the same truth. I had spent years being invisible in my own family, and now, finally, I existed on my own terms. A few weeks later, I drove back to Willow Creek, not to the inn, that chapter was closed, but to the riverbank nearby. The snow had started to melt, and thin ribbons of water ran between the rocks. It smelled like damp earth and beginnings. Across the road, I could see the inn in the distance. The "for sale" sign was still out front, half covered by frost. No laughter, no guests, no lights. It looked peaceful, almost sleeping. For a long moment, I just stood there. That place had held so much of my life, my youth, my patience, my silence, and now it was finally empty enough for someone else to fill it. I thought about walking over, maybe stepping onto the porch one last time, but instead, I whispered a quiet goodbye from where I stood. Not because I couldn't go back, but because I no longer needed to. Life didn't transform overnight. I still had long days at work, bills to pay, and memories that came in waves. But something had shifted. I started waking up earlier, not to fix things, not to work, just to be. I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, watching sunlight spill through the trees, and think about how far I'd come from the woman who once believed her worth was measured by how much she could endure. Sometimes, when the phone rang, I'd see Mom's name flash across the screen. I didn't always answer. But when I did, we talked about small things. The weather, her garden, recipes. No apologies, no arguments. Just distance softened by time. Once she said quietly, "You were right to stand your ground." It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. Hannah didn't call for months. Then, one afternoon in early spring, an email arrived. Short, careful, civil. "Beth, I've moved to Portland, starting a small cafe. I know things got messy. I hope you're doing well." I read it twice, then replied, "I am. I hope you are too." That was all. No bitterness, no blame. Just two sentences that closed a door gently, instead of slamming it. The seasons turned again. By summer, the cottage had become something entirely mine. Walls painted soft cream, shelves lined with second-hand books, a small garden bursting with lavender and tomatoes. On Saturdays, I drove into town to volunteer at the library, helping organize old community records. The woman who ran the place, Margie, a retired teacher with kind eyes, became a friend. Sometimes, over coffee, she'd ask about my life before the cottage. I told her bits and pieces, the inn, the family, the quiet years of holding too much. One day she said, "You know, Beth, some of us spend half our lives giving, and the other half learning it's okay to stop." I smiled. I guess I'm in the second half now. That fall, I hosted my first dinner at the cottage. Just a few neighbors, nothing fancy. Roast chicken, fresh bread, apple pie. When everyone left, the house was filled with the faint hum of laughter and the smell of cinnamon. I stood at the sink, washing dishes, and realized something simple but profound. Peace doesn't mean being alone. It just means being surrounded by the right kind of quiet. A few weeks later, I took a walk down to the creek. The water was low, the stones slick and shining in the sunlight. I carried a small wooden box with me, the one I'd kept Dad's notes in. Inside, I'd added something new. A photo of the inn, the court papers, and a tiny sprig of lavender from my garden. Kneeling by the water, I opened the box one last time. "Thank you," I whispered, not to anyone specific, but to everything that had brought me here. The heartbreak, the silence, the lessons, the letting go. Then I set the box gently into the water and watched it drift away, spinning slowly before disappearing around the bend. For a moment, I stood there barefoot, the cold creek curling around my ankles. And then I laughed, softly, freely, the kind of laugh that feels like breathing again. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anything that wasn't mine. That night, as I sat by the fire with a cup of tea, I realized something my father had probably known all along. Some inherit houses, some inherit names, but the lucky ones, they inherit themselves. And that's what I'd finally done. Sometimes peace doesn't come from holding on, it comes from finally letting go. Beth learned that family isn't always where love begins, but sometimes it's where we learn what love should never be. She spent years giving time, forgiveness, loyalty, believing it would make her belong. But in the silence that followed loss, she found something far greater than belonging. She found herself. The truth is, not everyone will understand the weight you carry when your love comes wrapped in patience. Not everyone will notice the quiet ways you hold everything together. But one day, you'll stop waiting for their permission to rest. You'll stop apologizing for choosing peace. And that moment, that small, steady moment, will feel like coming home. So if you've ever loved too hard, stayed too long, or given more than you should, remember this: your worth was never theirs to decide. You were enough all along. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, your love, your truth, your place are worth defending.